Welcome back to the Sunny Stampin' Studio. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to make this fun Halloween card. Why don't we get started? First thing you're going to need is a piece of 2 by 2 3/4 inch Whisper White cardstock. I'm going to grab my embossing buddy and I'm just going to run it over the surface of the Whisper White cardstock. This is going to eliminate static so that embossing powder won't stick where I don't want it to. I'm now going to grab my tree stamp from the House of Haunt stamp set and I'm going to ink it up very well in basic black craft ink. Now craft ink is a pigment ink. It is much thicker than our classic ink and it stays wet a lot longer. So I'm just pressing straight down. I'm going to hold my cardstock as I lift my stamp because it is a bit of a sticky ink, so I didn't want my paper to go flying. Now because this is a slow drying ink, what it does is enable us to emboss with it. So I'm just going to carefully remove this from my grid paper and I'm going to grab my basic black embossing powder. I like to keep my embossing powder in a little Tupperware container because I find that there's less mess and less waste. So I'm just sprinkling the embossing powder onto my image, making sure that I've covered every area. I'm just going to give my paper a bit of a tap and then I'm going to carefully grab the corner, flip it over, and just give it a couple of light flicks to get rid of excess embossing powder. So I'm now going to turn on my heat tool, so it is going to get a bit loud for a few moments as I heat emboss this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in so that you can see what it looks like as it's embossing. Just like that. And I'm going to hang on to this with my paper piercing tool because it does tend to get hot. So it's going to get loud here for a few minutes. Now you can tell when your image is done because the embossing powder melts and becomes raised and shiny, and you can actually see the shine moving across the surface of the paper as you're heat embossing it. So you can see that. I'm now going to zoom back out. So I'm now going to grab my elegant eggplant ink pad and a wedge of stamping sponge. And I'm just going to dab my sponge, hold my paper carefully between my hands, and then just drag it along the edge of my Whisper White cardstock. And what I just want to do is to get a very faint sponging of elegant eggplant around the outline of the Whisper White. Like so. Now that that's done, I'm going to grab a piece of elegant eggplant cardstock, and this piece of cardstock is just 1/8 of an inch bigger than the Whisper White. So it is 2 7/8 by 2 1/8. So I'm going to center and stick this to my elegant eggplant, and I'm going to set that aside for just a moment. I'm now going to grab an old olive card, and this card is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I've got a piece of designer paper from the Cast of Spell designer paper series. This is 4 1/4 inches by 3 1/2. So I'm going to go ahead and put some snail adhesive on the back. And then I'm going to put some just along the very edge, just like this. Because what I'm going to do is grab a piece of elegant eggplant grosgrain ribbon. This is 6 inches. And I want to lay it across the seam of my Cast of Spell designer paper. And then very carefully wrap the end of the ribbon around and stick it to the back, to the snail adhesive that I previously placed. Now when you're laying your grosgrain ribbon across, make sure you don't pull it too tight, otherwise your paper will buckle. So there we go. I'm making sure the ends aren't sticking out, and I'm just going to go ahead and put a little bit of snail adhesive directly on top of the ribbon ends. I don't want them to stick out or shift once I've stuck this to my old olive card. So I'm now going to center and stick this onto my old olive card front. like so. So I'm going to take my image, which I previously stamped, and I'm just going to lay it on my card front for placement. I'm then going to grab my imaging sheet from my Stamp-A-Majig, and I'm going to align it so that the greeting will be just underneath my image piece. You can now slide your image piece aside and grab your T-tool. And then once your T-tool was aligned with your imaging sheet, you can slide your imaging sheet away. So I'm inking up my stamp, and this is from the Grateful Greeting stamp set in Basic Black Classic ink. I'm now going to grab my image piece again, and I'm just positioning my card with my grid paper just to make sure it's straight, and then I'm going to stick my image piece onto my card front. Now the last thing I want to do is add a few brads. Now normally I try to hide my brads behind a mat of cardstock so that it doesn't show on the inside of the card, but in this case it's almost impossible to do that because I don't have that extra layer to hide it behind. So I'm going to grab, this is my paper piecing template that comes with my mat pack, and I've aligned the edge with the bottom edge of the ribbon, so there's a line here. And I'm just going to count in, I've got one hole here along the edge of this elegant eggplant, 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to skip 2 holes, and I'm going to pierce, I'm going to skip 2 holes again, and I'm going to pierce. So there you can see I've got 3 holes pierced. So the last thing that I now have left to do is just to insert my brads. And this is from the Vintage Brads collection. Now if you find you didn't pierce your holes big enough, you can just go in and poke your paper piercing tool the rest of the way, and that'll widen the hole a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and insert all my brads, and I'm now going to flip this over and open up the prongs on the back. Now if you want to hide the prongs of your brads, what you could do is to cut a piece of Whisper White cardstock that is 1/4 of an inch smaller than the card front, so it would be 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, and you can mat it on top of this, and that'll hide the backs of the brads. So there you go, we're all done. See how easy that was and how much fun? Well, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I look forward to stamping with you again.